Hi, my name is Ryland Schaul, and I did my project on surveying Douglas fir mortality rates in Seward Park this summer. For some background, Seward Park is an urban old-growth forest on a peninsula that sits on Lake Washington. In Washington and other parts of the Pacific Northwest, Douglas firs tend to be the dominant tree species of the forest. Douglas firs are an extremely important species to the lowlands of the Pacific Northwest as they serve several important roles within their ecosystems. An example of their roles is acting as nurse logs, which allows them to return nutrients back to the soil and give new life to plants and trees that take root in their fallen logs. An example of a nurse log is here depicted in Figure 1. Douglas firs are also the drivers of forest succession. When they take dominance, they close out the forest canopy and allow for shade-tolerant species like western hemlocks and western red cedars to grow in. Of the last decade, there has been rising concerns about the health of Seward Park's forest. Two abundant species in the forest have shown heavy signs of decline. These species are the sword ferns and the western hemlocks. Large patches of sword ferns all over the forest have died off and left the grounds barren that were once filled with lush green vegetation. With the hemlocks and older and younger trees of the species, they've been dying off rapidly throughout the forest. Their once abundant numbers have dwindled significantly. With the evident die-off of these two important species, a project was proposed to check up on the Douglas firs, as they're also key to Seward Park's forest. So my two research questions that I explored for this project were, what is the mortality rate of Douglas firs in Seward Park and how has it changed in the last 30 years? What is the mortality rate of Douglas firs in the Pacific Northwest and how does this rate compare to Seward Park? So this summer, I interned with the organization Friends of Seward Park. Figure 2 shows a map of the peninsula. The image on the left shows the trails we walked, and the image on the right gives a better geographical idea of where it is located. There were two parts to my work during the summer, the first part being conducting a literature review on Douglas fir mortality rates and Douglas fir forest structures in Washington and other parts of the Pacific Northwest. The second part to my project was surveying fallen Douglas fir nurse logs in Seward Park and using that data to identify whether the mortality rate of Douglas firs in Seward Park were changing within the last 30 years. So our methods consisted of finding and surveying every Douglas fir nurse log we could find within 20 feet of the main trails. Upon finding these logs, we recorded our data, and then eventually we used a coding program to analyze the data and create a model representing the mortality rates. So for our results, after analyzing the data, it was found that among the many attributes that we collected, that the collapse rate of logs proved to be the most influential on dating logs. For this project, collapse is defined as how sunken in a log is to the ground and how old it has become. We depicted this on a scale of 0 to 1.0. We assigned each log a number along that scale. We used a roughly 90-year-old log as a baseline for the linear model we were able to create. This log was assigned a collapse level of 1, and it really drove the ability to use this model to date other trees. Figure 3 shows the model we created with the plotted trees and their collapse points. As shown, the higher the collapse rating, the larger amount of years the log has spent on the ground. So through my literature review, I was able to find that typical Douglas fir mortality rates sit around 0.5 to 1% each year. Mount Rainier National Park has a mortality rate of 0.9%, and other parts of the Cascade regions has something around 0.5% for a mortality rate. In Seward, we were able to identify that in the last 30 to 60 years, 10 Douglas firs fell within our sample region, and 14 Douglas firs fell within the last 30 years. With there only being a 4-tree increase, our conclusion was that there was no increase in Douglas fir mortality, meaning the Douglas fir population is standing strong. Something notable to address are the large storms that have taken place both in 1992 and 2006, which could have attributed to the slightly higher number of trees falling in the last 30 years. So for a broader significance of this issue, with the times of climate change, it is important to understand how our forests are changing. Rising temperatures can lead to the change of forest dynamics and succession. With Douglas firs being such a prominent species here, it is important to understand how they will respond to a changing climate. With Seward Park being an urban forest that is susceptible to higher temperatures than, for example, the Cascade Mountain region, making Seward Park a possible indicator for us for what could come in the near future in other forest regions. And so I would like to thank my site supervisor for giving me this opportunity for this research, and I would like to thank my faculty advisor as well as my friends and families for aiding me in support throughout this project.